The running back position for 2022 fantasy football has already had its clear separation of the values here for this season. After week one, when everything looked so golden and great, all the players were healthy, all of the situations seemed so stable, things have quickly crumbled for some of fantasy football's appearing to be best players at the running back position. So in this video, I'll be walking you guys through 5 players who had some pretty solid games here in week 2, but I'm hitting the sell button on and I'm looking to explore greener pastures here as we approach week 3 fantasy football. So if you're new around here, drop down, smash that like button, click the subscribe button, and make sure you have that bell on so you can jump into these videos as soon as they drop. The quicker you get in here, the quicker I can answer your questions, the quicker other people in the community can help you out, and the quicker we can get you on your way to smashing and dominating your fantasy leagues for this NFL season. So thanks so much for stopping in, you guys. Let's get started. Alrighty, here we go. So Operation Sell the Fool's Gold is now underway here. There is no position group quite like the running back position in fantasy football, and you gotta make sure you've got valuable long-term pieces in those starting lineups. So we'll start here with Antonio Gibson, a player who has had very good success as a solid running back too throughout the first 2 weeks of the season here. But of course, I have to mention what I feel is pretty obvious, but maybe some of you guys are unaware. Brian Robinson's return is not nearly as far away as it may have initially seemed. He is not able to play football until after the first 4 games of the season, but that makes right about now. Maybe you still have a window until the end of next week to sell Antonio Gibson high here, but while you've got back-to-back high, production games, 10 or more points in half PPR scoring, I'm getting rid of him. Obviously you've got the potential. He's playing a game this week. If things don't go as planned here, you could get his value starting to decline, which is the last thing you want to do when time is pressing your back up against the wall for a potential Brian Robinson resurgence on this roster and potentially having him take some of these goal line carries and rushing opportunities from Gibson's fantasy value. So, like I said, Brian won't be a factor in this situation until week 5 at the earliest. He is back doing the agility portion of the Commanders' offensive drills. If you're unaware, he was involved in a gun violence related incident in a carjacking literally right at the end of draft season this year. I literally had a draft going on while that occurred, and he had just been picked. So really unfortunate stuff for Brian. Hopefully he can get back healthy and on the field at 100% health. It sounds like he's roaring back here. He's in great shape, and everything seems to be trending in a positive direction. So for Gibson, a guy I was very low on coming into the season because of Brian Robinson's presence, if he gets back out there and starts making noise in this backfield, Gibson owners should be, sounding the emergency alarms here and moving on to different players and guys like you can find in our must-buy video that was also posted today. So go check out the channel and check out that video after you're done watching this. We've got a week 3 fantasy football playlist with everything you need for this week's game. So selling Antonio Gibson, I do want to mention though, 12 targets in 2 games here, been a very good involved factor in the receiving portion of things here. And as I said, 10 or more fantasy points in each game. Sell while things are going well here. And as long as things are trending in the right direction, all the more reason to sell with kind of that looming cloud of doom approaching us here. Damien Harris, the next player I'm selling high on here. This is a really interesting, odd, and confusing running backfield situation for the Pats here. Despite the fact that New England led for literally almost the entire contest, it might have been the entire contest. I didn't really sit down and watch that game snap for snap like a hawk, but it was on red zone repeatedly just because of things that were happening there and lulls in other games. So I saw a good chunk of that Patriots game. And what I was really surprised to find when I went in and dug into some of the data from the contest is that Damien Harris, despite having a positive game script, having a good production game here, had just a 40% snap share. We saw him at 39% in week 1, rose up 1% here in week 2, had 16.7 fantasy points, but again, Ramondre Stevenson had a 62% snap share and far less production. So the valuable touches are going to Damien Harris. He's getting those goal line opportunities. He is one of the better goal line backs in the National Football League, especially for a Patriots offense that's very run-centric. but you've got such a weird dynamic. After week 1, Stevenson was the number 3 player in this backfield in terms of allotted snap share percentage. Ty Montgomery, before landing on the injured reserve, was number 2 because of the amount of third down and long situations that they needed a pass catching back on the field for. But it's just such an odd read here. Harris scored 15 rushing touchdowns, or 15 total touchdowns, I should say, last season, and he needs to do that again if he's going to continue to be a viable weekly running back too. We saw him have a down week in week 1 without that rushing touchdown, and it's kind of touchdown or bust here for Harris. That's really the name of the game for him. He'll have some really good multi-touchdown games, but it makes you sweat every week. If he doesn't get that goal line carry, you're kind of out of luck, and that's something that you have to be willing to live with as a Damien Harris fantasy owner. Otherwise, you can get yourself into some troubling situations here. So I'm looking to sell high after scoring a touchdown this week. I don't like the fact that despite Stevenson not getting the touches when he's on the field, he is still out there on the field like 12% more than you're seeing a guy of Damien Harris. So it's a weird, again, frustrating situation for Damien Harris owners, but we kind of expected this going into the season. TD or bust, that's Damien Harris and the lifestyle he chose. Let's move on here to Tony Pollard, another running back I'm selling high on this week. I appreciated and liked Tony Pollard's role in terms of touching the football a bit better this week, but what I didn't like was the lack of snap share that he was out there on the field for. Just 39% of Dallas's offensive plays, Pollard was out there on the field. To be frank, I think they need to get him the football more. I think he needs more touches, more pass game usage, and more use in the run game as well, because he is evidently the more explosive running back for this team. He's the better pass-catching back out of the backfield, and we saw him have that 40-yard rip down the left sideline. They ended up giving him the go-ahead goal line rushing touchdown in that game because he kind of earned it there, was marked down just barely short of the goal line. But this is something that I have my concerns about every fantasy player in this Dallas offense not named CeeDee Lamb, and you might be surprised to hear that if you haven't watched my must-buy wide receivers episode for this week. If you haven't done so, go check that out. But basically, all these other players, until Dak Prescott is on the field, I'm quite worried about. We saw Zeke and Tony Pollard have less than a 5% target share in week 1. And moving into week 2 here, things got better for Pollard. It was still a very rough and tough game for Ezekiel Elliott. And despite the fact that he was able to, again, have 4 receptions, 55 yards on 7 targets, and be very efficient, I just don't think that this is very reliable starting lineup caliber play here. It's hard to project this stuff in this gadget type role that Tony Pollard gets on a given week. They'll put him in motion. They'll give him a push pass. Maybe they'll throw him a quick little speed out or flag route out of the backfield. But you don't know, out of the slot. But you don't know how consistently that production is coming. It's not like a Deebo Samuel where I can tell you he's going to get 5 targets at the line of scrimmage this week and do a heck of a lot after the catch. Pollard could do that. I'm not saying he's Deebo Samuel, but they choose not to. So for me, that's where the concern comes from. It's sporadic and inconsistent usage. I know he's great when he touches the football. I know he's an efficient and talented playmaker for this team that can contribute in both phases of things. But after week 1 as well, which I get I'm a little bit hung up on here, but his usage was so baffling to me. They were putting him in the backfield and asking him to pass protect for Dak Prescott late in the game instead of running him on a route. They were asking him to sit back there, subbing Zeke out, one of the better pass protectors in the game, and instead of causing a positive circumstance for your offense, lining up a skilled playmaker like a Tony Pollard out wide and asking him to run around and contribute in the passing game, they were using him at something he wasn't very good at and asking him to contribute in that way, which of course doesn't help our fantasy purposes here. So I just don't trust this Dallas offense as a whole. I think if you're a Zeke owner and you want to hold Tony Pollard, that's fine. It kind of sucks because either way it feels like a lose-lose with Cooper Rush in the lineup right now. He's got some stones. He threw some passes this past week. But while Pollard had that production, produced 15 plus points in half PPR this week, I'll be selling, seeing if I can pick up a more of a project long-term guy like a Dameon Pierce. Maybe somehow you can get your hands on a Breece Hall, or maybe you could get your hands on someone else that gives you that RB2 caliber level production. So James Robinson, moving into our fourth this is our must-sell running back for this week. J-Rob is someone for me that I am selling, not because I don't think he has viable usage in fantasy lineups. I talked about this week in the lessons learned segment, but I firmly believe that James Robinson has kind of had the best case scenario play out for him here the first 2 weeks of the season. I believe J-Rob this year is a touchdown dependent top 24 play. The same type of thing we're seeing from Damien Harris. They get the goal line carries. They're the preferred goal line asset for their offenses, but they're relatively inefficient rushers. Not that they can't have great games, but they aren't always the most dependable in terms of their yards produced to give you fantasy-worthy points that way, or super avid, involved pieces in the receiving game that are able to contribute efficiently in that phase of things. For the Jags, you've got Travis Etienne here. That's the guy that while they don't always put him in the backfield, they're looking to throw him passes out of that RB-slated position. For the Patriots, it was Ty Montgomery, like I said, week 1. It was probably supposed to be James White this year, but he retired. Now maybe it's Ramondre Stevenson. That role is yet to be defined for that offense. But for J-Rob here, he had a 37-yard touchdown run this week, totaling 3 total scores in the first 2 games. Aside from that, though, just 27 yards on 23 touches. So a very inefficient game for James Robinson against the Colts and a positive game script here. And it really was that touchdown for the make or break performance and finish here. So if you can find someone, like I said, maybe it is a Breece Hall, who I think is a lot more of a viable sell here for J-Rob to get in return. I think that his value is higher than Tony Pollard at this current point in time. A Breece Hall would be a perfect addition here, getting James Robinson off of your team, someone that might fade down the stretch here if Etienne emerges and breaks out, whatever the case might be. And I'm not saying that will play out here, but I want to invest into ascending assets. We know what James Robinson is, and if that works for your team, perfect. That's fine. If you're comfortable with the touchdown-dependent RB2 play, maybe you're playing in a standard league where that's kind of the name of the game regardless, that's fine to stick with J-Rob here. Maybe you trust him more than an ETN, which I totally, again, understand, but I am looking for higher upside pieces and looking to improve when the opportunity does provide itself. So, again, 3 touchdowns in 2 weeks, averaging over a touchdown per contest. Not something I'm expecting to be a trend here for a Jacksonville Jaguars backfield. And then Jeff Wilson Jr., again, not selling this player for a blue chip asset on your fantasy rosters, but definitely someone that has a usage on the open trade market. There is basically an expiration date on Jeff Wilson Jr., and that is whenever Kyle Shanahan deems that he is not the hot hand for this 49ers backfield. We saw 14 touches week 1 without Elijah Mitchell, week 2 in the NFL purposes, go to Tyrion Davis-Price. That is important. That is a big deal. You had 18 rushes go to Jeff Wilson Jr., 32 rushes between the two backs go to Tyrion Davis-Price. Now, thankfully, for the purposes of Jeff Wilson Jr., he was far more efficient than J-Rob was. However, that might not be the case next week, and I'm not predicting that to be the case here. I'm just outlining a potential possibility. We saw Jordan Mason not really be involved this week. Maybe they, kick Tyrion Davis-Price to the curb and put him in there, and maybe he kills it, and then moving forward, he's the hot hand. So it's a lot of uncertainty and question marks here. Find that running back needy team in your league. Scoop up that wide receiver play that could potentially pop here in a couple of weeks, or maybe he showed some flashes like a Chris Olave this past week, 13 targets, over 300 air yards. They just need to start converting on some of those opportunities. Maybe it's one of those type of players. Your D-bet running back, you had waiver priority, and you got Jeff Wilson Jr. Whatever the case might be, try and take advantage of him because it's about 2 months away, probably about 7 weeks now that we're expecting Mitchell and that MCL injury to come back here, and someone else will be toting the rock, whether that is Mitchell or Jeff Wilson flat out. I apologize, my chair keeps squeaking here. Whether that is Jeff Wilson Jr. or someone else taking his job before then. And again, I'm not predicting that to be the case, but it's very possible, knowing the nature of the beast here. Maybe he just gets run into the ground, and the amount of touches and duress that his body takes, he breaks down and he misses time, and then his value is shot. So try and take advantage of the 100-plus scrimmage yards he had here in week 2, and that clock is ticking, so make sure you don't end up having that ticking time bomb blow up on the bottom of your roster. So Antonio Gibson, to recap, Damien Harris, Tony Pollard, James Robinson, and Jeff Wilson Jr. are our 5 sells here at the running back position for Week 3 fantasy football. If you enjoyed, drop a like, click the subscribe button if you're new around here, turn the bell on so you can race to these videos and get your questions in and answered in a timely manner. And I appreciate you guys for stopping by. I'll see you next time. Peace out.